All right, with just the background going, I'm pretty sure you might have an idea of who we are going to be covering today. If you have not heard of this case, where have you been living? This is the case of Dr. Christopher Duntsch, also known as Dr. Death. Hence why we're in the operating room right now. Christopher Daniel Duntsch is a former American neurosurgeon who has been nicknamed Dr. Death for 33 incidents of gross neurosurgical malpractice while working at hospitals in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, which maimed 31 patients and caused 2 deaths. He was accused of injuring 33 out of 38 patients in less than 2 years. He was allowed to continue practicing because hospital officials and regulators found it hard to believe a surgeon would be so incompetent and dangerous. His license was finally revoked by the Texas Medical Board in 2013. In 2017, Duntsch was convicted of maiming one of his patients and sentenced to life imprisonment. He was convicted February 20th of 2017, and the criminal charge was injury to an elderly person. Penalty was the life with 30 years minimum. He's imprisoned and incarcerated same thing, O.B. Ellis unit of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. His earliest possible parole date would be July 20th, 2045. That doesn't seem too far away. Christopher Duntsch was born in Montana and spent most of his youth in Memphis, Tennessee. His father, Donald, was a physical therapist and Christian missionary, and his mother, Susan, was a school teacher. He was the oldest of 4 children. He has 2 brothers, Nathan and Matt, and a sister, Liz. Christopher is a graduate of a Christian school in Cordova, Tennessee, which he was a football player. Dr. Death initially attended Millsaps College to play Division III college football and later transferred to Division I Colorado State University. Former teammates later said Dr. Death trained hard but lacked talent. Duntsch returned home to attend Memphis State University, now the University of Memphis, though he hoped to play football again. Duntsch had exhausted his football eligibility and decided to switch to a career in medicine. He completed his undergraduate degree at Memphis State in 1995. After graduating from Memphis State, he continued on to an MD PhD program at the University of Tennessee at Memphis College of Medicine, earning degrees in 2001 and 2002. In 2010, Duntsch completed the MD, PhD, and neurosurgery residency programs at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, and then a spine fellowship program at the Seams-Murphy Clinic in Memphis. A lot of hard fucking work. That is probably really and truly why it took so long for people to catch on, because it's like, why would somebody spend 15 to 16 years of their life in school for this profession to hurt people? But nonetheless, he did. Dr. Death participated in fewer than 200 surgeries during his residency. Neurosurgery residents typically participate in over 1,000 surgeries. He was suspected of being under the influence of cocaine while operating during his 4th year of residency training. He was sent to a program for impaired physicians for several months before being allowed to return to the residency. Never knew there was such a thing. There's like a separate division of rehab, I guess, for physicians. Odd. Dr. Death's supervisors were concerned enough that they did not allow him to operate without direct supervision. Imagine a doctor operating on your brain while he's under the influence of snow or under the influence of anything. Several of Duntsch's friends recalled him going to work after a night of doing you know what, with one saying he would never allow Duntsch to operate on him. So his friends are seeing that he went out and was partying and into things that he shouldn't be doing, maybe climbing some steep snowy mountains and staying on those snowy mountains all night, and then showing up to operate on patients' brains in the morning. That is just insane. A regular in Memphis strip clubs, Duntsch came to the attention of an exotic dancer, Wendy Renee Young. In 2011, Young approached Duntsch at a club upon noticing that all the other girls were over there, making her aware that he was a doctor and that, of course, that's where you're going to go for money. She immediately moved in with him. They had 2 sons together and broke up just before the birth of their second son in September of 2014. Initially, Duntsch focused heavily on the PhD half of his degree. His name appeared on several papers and patents. He took part in a number of biotech startups. However, by the time he met Young, Duntsch was over $500,000 in debt. He decided to turn to neurosurgery, which can be a lucrative field. In 2010, Duntsch moved to Dallas, Texas. He persuaded Young to come with him since she grew up in the Dallas area. Duntsch appeared extremely qualified on paper. He had spent 15 years in training, medical school, residency, and fellowship, and his curriculum was 12 single-paced pages. Duntsch also falsely claimed to have graduated magna cum laude from St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital with a doctorate in microbiology, a program the hospital did not offer when he allegedly attended. Which, how was that not verified? Duntsch soon joined Baylor Regional Medical Center at Plano, now Baylor Scott and White Medical Center, Plano, as a minimally invasive spine surgeon with a salary of $600,000 per year, plus bonuses. Early in his tenure at Baylor Plano, Duntsch made a poor impression on a few of his fellow surgeons. Veteran vascular surgeon Randall Kirby recalled that Duntsch frequently boasted about his abilities despite being so new to the area. He also recalled that Duntsch's skills in the operating room left much to be desired. As Kirby put it, he could not wield a scalpel. Several of Duntsch's surgeries at Baylor Plano resulted in severely maimed patients. Kenneth Fennell, the first patient Duntsch operated on at Baylor Plano, was left with chronic pain after Duntsch operated on the wrong part of his back. Fennell later had a second operation by Duntsch to relieve it and was left paralyzed in his legs. Fennell required months of rehabilitation to walk with a cane and was left unable to walk over 30 feet or stand more than a few minutes. Lee Passmore, a Collin County medical investigator, experienced chronic pain and limited mobility after Dr. Duntsch cut a ligament not normally touched during the particular procedure, misplaced hardware in his spine, incorrectly located a screw used to keep the hardware in place, and stripped its threads so it could not be removed. Even if Duntsch had not stripped the threads, he placed the screw in a location that would have caused Passmore to bleed out if it had been removed. Vascular surgeon Mark Hoyle, who assisted with the operation, later recalled that Duntsch seemed oblivious to the considerable bleeding. Hoyle became so disturbed by Duntsch's actions that at one point he physically restrained him and later told Duntsch to his face that he was dangerous. Duntsch's behavior led Hoyle to question his sanity. Barry Morgoloff, the owner of a pool service company, was left with bone fragments in his spinal canal after Duntsch tried to pull a damaged disc out of his back with a grabbing tool. Duntsch initially refused to give Morgoloff any pain medication, claiming he was a drug seeker. Morgoloff eventually lost most function on his left side and required a wheelchair. Dr. Kirby assisted with the surgery and recalled that Duntsch continued making mistakes even after having the correct anatomy pointed out to him. Morgulov later recalled that he walked out on a follow-up visit with Dr. Duntsch when he displayed clear signs of being inebriated. Jerry Summers, a longtime friend of Dr. Duntsch, came to Baylor Plano to have 2 neck vertebrae fused. Oh my gosh, I remember this one. During the operation, Duntsch botched the removal disc. During the operation, Duntsch botched the removal of a disc, rendering Summers a quadriplegic. He performed a second surgery and packed the spine with a large amount of gel foam, constricting the spinal cord. The anesthesiologist who worked on the surgery recalled that Summers lost almost 1,200 milliliters of blood, more than a fifth of his blood volume, and almost 24 times the typical amount lost in a spinal fusion. The nurses and the other staffers who took part in the surgery expected Summers to have a revision surgery, but Duntsch refused to do it. Summers later stated that he and Duntsch used snowy substances the night before his surgery. Although he passed a rug test, Baylor Plano officials were concerned enough to force Duntsch on leave pending a peer review. While Duntsch was cleared to resume operating while the review was underway, hospital officials requested he limit himself to minor surgeries until it was complete. Summers then admitted the snow claim was untrue and he made it up after being upset that Duntsch refused to check on him. Summers remained a quadriplegic and died in 2021 of an infection relating to complications from Duntsch's operation. Kelly Martin was undergoing a routine decompression operation, the simplest type of spine surgery, when Duntsch cut through her spinal cord and severed an artery. He continued operating despite clear signs that Martin was losing a large volume of blood. Over warnings by a trauma surgeon colleague and an anesthesiologist, Duntsch refused to acknowledge anything that was wrong, hindering the ICU's team efforts to save Martin. When she awoke from anesthesia, she was screaming and clawing at her legs, forcing the ICU team to put her back under anesthesia. Duntsch also stayed out in the ICU waiting room writing notes rather than attending his patient, even after Martin went into cardiac arrest. Martin ultimately bled to death. Baylor Plano officials found that Duntsch failed to meet their standards to care and permanently revoked his surgical privileges. The hospital initiated another peer review, but Duntsch resigned rather than face certain termination. To avoid the cost of fighting and possibly losing a wrongful termination suit as well as possible patient lawsuits for Duntsch's botched surgeries, Baylor Plano officials agreed with Duntsch's lawyers that he could resign in return for the hospital issuing a letter stating that there were no issues with him. Had Duntsch been fired, Baylor Plano would have been required to report him to the National Practitioners Data Bank, NPDB, which is intended to flag problematic physicians. Duntsch moved to Dallas Medical Center and Farmers Branch, where he was granted temporary privileges until hospital officials could obtain his records from Baylor Plano. Red flags surfaced early on, as nurses wondered if he was under the influence of drugs while on call. For instance, Duntsch came to work wearing the same tattered scrubs for 3 days in a row. He lasted for less than a week before administrators pulled his privileges after the death of a patient, Floella Brown, and the maiming of another, Mary Efford. Duntsch had severed Brown's vertebral artery and refused to abort the surgery despite massive blood loss. He then packed it too much with a substance intended to stop bleeding. Brown suffered a stroke as a result. Duntsch did not respond to messages from the hospital for a few hours, then the next day scheduled an elective surgery on Efford rather than care for Brown. Hospital officials were exasperated when Duntsch refused to delay Efford's surgery and asked him multiple times to care for Brown or transfer her out of his care. Duntsch suggested he perform a craniotomy on Brown to relieve the pressure. Hospital officials refused to allow it. Not only was Duntsch unqualified for brain surgery, but Dallas Medical Center did not have the equipment or personnel for such an operation. Brown was left in a coma for hours and was brain dead by the time Duntsch finally got to her transfer. While performing a spinal fusion on an effort, Duntsch severed one of her nerve roots while operating on the wrong portion of her back. Twisted a screw into another nerve, left screw holes on the opposite side of her spine, failed to remove the disc he was supposed to remove, and left surgical hardware in her muscle tissue so loose that it moved when touched. Despite several warnings from his colleagues that he was not doing the surgery correctly and was attempting to put screws into muscle rather than bone, Duntsch persisted. Effort was paralyzed. She later recalled waking up feeling excruciating pain of 10 plus on a scale of 1 to 10. Several people in the operating room during Effort's surgery suspected Duntsch might have been intoxicated, recalling that his pupils were dilated. Longtime spine surgeon Robert Henderson performed the salvage surgery on Effort. He would subsequently be called in to perform salvage procedures on many of Duntsch's patients. When he saw the imaging from Duntsch's surgery, he was so certain that there would be legal action that he had the salvage surgery recorded. Henderson likened what he found when he opened up Effort to the results of a child playing with Tinker Toys or a erector set, not surgery. He described Duntsch's surgery as an assault and concluded that Effort would have been bedridden for the rest of her life had the salvage surgery not been performed. The damage to Effort led Henderson to wonder if Duntsch was an imposter. He could not believe that a real surgeon would botch Effort's surgery so badly. He later recalled that in his view, anyone with a basic knowledge of human anatomy would know that when he was operating in the wrong area at Effort's back. Henderson sent Duntsch's picture to the University of Tennessee to determine whether he actually had a degree from that institution and received confirmation that he did, leading him to conclude that Duntsch had to have known how to do it right and then decided to do the complete opposite. He called Duntsch's fellowship supervisor in Memphis and the supervisor of Duntsch's residency. It was then that he learned about the incident that led him to be referred to the impaired physicians program. Despite both of his surgeries at Dallas Medical going catastrophically awry, hospital officials did not report him to the NPDB. At the time, hospitals were not required to report doctors who only had temporary privileges. So after leaving Dallas Medical, Dr. Duntsch received privileges at Southampton Community Hospital in Dallas. So he's kind of like hospital hopping at this point. Going here, performing crazy surgeries, screwing up, leaving. Going here, leaving. Just over and over and over. After leaving Dallas Medical, Duntsch received privileges at Southampton Community Hospital in Dallas and also took a job at an outpatient clinic named Legacy Surgery Center, now Frisco Ambulatory Surgery Center in Frisco. There, he damaged patient Jeff Cheney's spinal cord, leaving him without feeling on the right side of his body. He then damaged patient Philip Mayfield's spinal cord, drilling into it and leaving him partially paralyzed from the neck down. After undergoing physical rehabilitation, Mayfield was able to walk with a cane but continued to experience paralysis on the right side of his body and in his left arm. He also reported shooting pains throughout his body. Mayfield died of COVID-19 in February of 2021. According to his wife, he had been vulnerable to the virus due to the complications of being maimed by Dr. Duntsch. While attempting to remove degenerative discs in Marshall Tech's Muse's back, Duntsch left surgical hardware floating between the spine and muscle tissue. Muse woke up in considerable pain, but Duntsch convinced him it was normal. He then prescribed Muse so much Percocet that a pharmacist refused to fill the prescription. The pharmacist feared Duntsch was trying to kill Muse. Muse spiraled into opioid addiction that cost him his wife and his job. He later recalled that he read about Kelly Martin's death on the day before the surgery, but Duntsch had cursed him out when he called to ask about it. While operating on Jacqueline Troy, Duntsch damaged her vocal cords, her trachea, and an artery. Troy was left barely able to speak above a whisper, had to be sedated for weeks, and had to be fed through a feeding tube for some time as food was entering her lungs. Despite this, Duntsch was retained by Southampton when new owners bought it and renamed it University General Hospital. When Duntsch applied for privileges at Methodist Hospital in Dallas, the hospital queried the NPDB. Soon afterward, he severely maimed Jeff Glidewell after mistaking part of his neck muscle for a tumor during a routine cervical fusion, severing one of his vocal cords, cutting a hole in his esophagus, and slicing an artery. Duntsch stuffed a surgical sponge in Glidewell's throat to stanch the bleeding. However, he closed Glidewell with a sponge in place. Despite others in the operating room warning him about it, the sponge triggered a severe bloodborne infection that caused Glidewell to become septic. When the other doctors discovered the sponge, Duntsch refused to return to help remove it. After several days, Dr. Kirby was brought in to repair the damage. He later described that he found after opening Glidewell back up as the work of a crazed maniac. He later told Glidewell that it was clear Duntsch tried to kill him. Glidewell was left with only one vocal cord, permanent damage to his esophagus, and partial paralysis on the left side. Dr. Kirby claimed that it looked as if Duntsch had tried to decapitate Glidewell and contended that such a botched surgery has not happened in the United States of America before. Glidewell was reportedly still suffering the ill effects of Duntsch's operation years later and has undergone more than 50 procedures to correct the damage. At one point, he could only eat small bites of food. He proved to be Duntsch's last patient. University General pushed him out soon afterwards. Dr. Kirby wrote a detailed complaint to the Texas Medical Board calling Duntsch a sociopath who was a clear and present danger to the citizens of Texas. Under heavy lobbying from Dr. Kirby and Henderson, the Texas Medical Board suspended Duntsch's license on June 26, 2013. The lead investigator on the case later revealed that she wanted Duntsch's license suspended while the 10-month probe was underway, but board attorneys were unwilling to agree. According to board chairman Erwin Zietzler, many board members found it hard to believe that a trained surgeon could be as incompetent as Duntsch appeared. It took until June 2013 to find the pattern of a patient injury required to justify suspending Duntsch's license. They later argued that complications were more common in neurosurgery than most laymen believe. However, Dr. Martin Lazar, a veteran neurosurgeon that the board consulted on the case, was scathingly critical of Duntsch's work. Lazar was particularly angered that Duntsch missed signs that Martin was bleeding out, saying, you can't not know that and be a neurosurgeon. The Texas Medical Board revoked Duntsch's license on December 6th, 2013. Duntsch moved to Denver, Colorado, where he went into a downward spiral. He declared bankruptcy after listing debts of over $1 million. He was arrested for driving under the influence in Denver, taken for a psychiatric evaluation in Dallas during a visit to see his children, and was arrested in Dallas for shoplifting. Let's get into some of these lawsuits. In March 2014, 3 of Duntsch's former patients, Mary Erford, Kenneth Fennell, and Lee Passmore, filed separate federal lawsuits against Baylor Plano, alleging the hospital allowed Duntsch to perform surgeries despite knowing that he was a dangerous physician. Then Texas Attorney General, later Governor Greg Abbott, filed a motion to intervene in the suits to defend Baylor Plano, citing the 2003 Texas statute that capped civil damages for medical malpractice at $250,000 and removed the term gross negligence from the legal definition of malice. The suit alleged that Baylor Plano made an average net profit of $65,000 on every spinal surgery performed by Duntsch. Now let's get into some of these criminal charges. Henderson and Dr. Kirby feared that Duntsch could move elsewhere and still theoretically get a medical license. Convinced that he was a clear and present danger to the public, they urged the Dallas County District's Attorney's Office to pursue criminal charges. The inquiry went nowhere until 2015, when the statute of limitations on any potential charges was due to run out. Part of the problem was that Duntsch's actions were willful as defined by Texas law. After interviewing dozens of his patients and their survivors, prosecutors concluded that Dr. Duntsch's actions were indeed criminal, and nothing short of imprisonment would prevent him from practicing medicine again. As part of their investigation, prosecutors obtained a December 2011 email in which Duntsch boasted that he was ready to leave the love and kindness and goodness and patience that I mix with everything else that I am and become a cold-blooded killer. Let me read that again. Duntsch boasted in an email in 2011, and he wrote, ready to leave the love and kindness and goodness and patience that I mix with everything else that I am and become a cold-blooded killer. ADA Michelle Shugart, who led the prosecution of Duntsch, later recalled that Henderson, Kirby, and Lazar contacted her demanding to testify against Duntsch. According to Shugart, doctors almost never testify against each other. In an article for the Texas Prosecutor, the Journal of the Texas District and County Attorneys Association, Shugart and other members of the trial team recalled that their superiors were initially skeptical when presented with the case, but eventually found themselves in overwhelming disbelief that a surgeon would do what Duntsch was accused of doing. As the trial team put it, the scary pattern of Duntsch's actions became apparent to others in the office, leading the DA to give the green light to take the case to a grand jury. Let's get into the arrest and prosecution. In July 2015, approximately a year and a half after his medical license was revoked, Duntsch was arrested in Dallas and charged with 6 felony counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, 5 counts of aggravated assault causing serious bodily injury, and 1 count of injury to an elderly person. The indictments were made 4 months before the statute of limitations would have expired. The last charge was for the maiming and paralyzing of effort. Prosecutors put a high priority on that charge, as it provided the widest sentencing range, with Duntsch facing up to life in prison if convicted. They also believe that charge was easy to prove in court. Duntsch was told repeatedly that he was not placing the hardware in the correct position, and the fluoroscopy images from effort surgery proved this. Prosecutors sought a sentence long enough to ensure that Duntsch could never practice medicine again. For the same reason, prosecutors opted to try Duntsch for efforts maiming first. He was held in the Dallas County Jail for almost 2 years until the case went to trial in 2017. By this time, Duntsch was almost penniless, and the court appointed a lawyer for him. God, imagine spending 16, 17 years of your life in college to become a doctor, a neurosurgeon. And this becomes your life. You're murdering people. You're hurting people on purpose, and now you're penniless. You're incarcerated and you're penniless. Shugart argued that Duntsch should have known he was likely to hurt others unless he changed his approach, and that his failure to learn from his past mistakes demonstrated that his maiming of effort was intentional. By her team's estimate, between them, Duntsch's patients lost 23 liters of blood, more than 10 times what they should have lost on an operation if he had operated correctly. Prosecutors faulted Duntsch's supervisors at the University of Tennessee for signing off on his credentials despite knowing about his history of, bad stuff doing bad things, that kind of abuse, rug abuse, you know? They also faulted his employers for not reporting him. They argued that Duntsch was motivated to continue operating because the lucrative salary of a neurosurgeon would solve his mounting financial problems. Over objections from Duntsch's lawyers, prosecutors called Morgoloff. Over objections from Duntsch's lawyers, prosecutors called Passmore, Morgoloff, and Summers as witnesses in order to prove that his actions were intentional. They also called Martin and Brown's families to testify as well. Prosecutors wanted to show that Duntsch knew he was reasonably certain to maim Efford and should have never taken her into surgery. According to his lawyers, Duntsch did not realize how poorly he had performed as a surgeon until he heard the prosecution experts tell the jury about his many blunders in the operating room. Duntsch's defense blamed their client's actions on poor training and lack of oversight by the hospitals. Sugart countered that the 2011 emails sent after his first surgeries went wrong, proved that Duntsch knew his actions were intentional. After 13 days of trial, the jury needed only 4 hours to convict Duntsch for the maiming of Efford. At the punishment phase, as the penalty phase is called in Texas, prosecutors called 10 more patients who had been maimed by Dr. Duntsch after he maimed Efford. They argued that Duntsch had sentenced his patients to a life of pain or death and deserved the same lifelong sentence they received. On February 20th, 2017, the jury needed only an hour to sentence him to life in prison. On December 10th, 2018, the Texas Court of Appeals affirmed Duntsch's conviction by a 2-1 split decision. On May 8, 2019, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals refused Duntsch's petition for discretionary review. The 4 hospitals that employed Duntsch have ongoing civil cases against him. Duntsch is housed and imprisoned at Texas Department of Criminal Justice. His inmate number is 021-39003. And he's housed at O.B. Ellis Unit outside Huntsville. Even with credit for the time served in the Dallas County Jail before trial, he is not eligible for parole until 2045, when he will be 74 years old. And like I say, with every case that has possibility of parole, your first time going parole, apparently, don't know. I've never gone for parole, but from what I've seen and what I hear, the first time you never get it. They say it takes normally like 4 or 5 times. If that, maybe, not even. You may just keep going every 2 years and get denied every 2 years. And at 74 years old, you know, you've already been there for how long? Duntsch's conviction has been called a precedent-setting case, as it is believed to be the first time in U.S. history that a physician was convicted on criminal charges for actions taken in the course of medical work. The Dallas County District Attorney's Office called it a historic case with respect to prosecuting a doctor who had done wrong during surgery. Testifying for the defense, UT Southwestern Director of Neurosurgery, Carlos Bagley, said, "The only way this happens is that the entire system fails the patients." A neurosurgery expert for Duntsch's defense team himself said the conditions which created Dr. Duntsch still exist, thereby making it possible for another to come along. I mean, I'm sure there are still bad doctors out there, but I will tell you this, I don't think that they're going to be harming up to 25 patients before people are speaking out about them. In pop culture, now, I found out about this case years ago by watching a popular show called Dr.Death. I think it's on Peacock, I want to say. And I did not realize for the longest time that was actually based on a true story. So then when I started looking into it, I just couldn't believe it. And there's many other shows, and I think there's a movie, there's a ton of stuff. So, there is also a podcast. So Wondery Media launched a podcast called Dr. Death, with the first season of 10 episodes focusing on Duntsch. Dr.Death, an 8-episode TV miniseries based on the podcast, began streaming on Peacock on July 15th, 2021. There's a follow-up docuseries. The Undoctored story was later released on Peacock on July 29th, 2021. In fact, I might rewatch this show because it's one of those shows that after a few years, you forget about it. Featuring interviews with some of Duntsch's patients and colleagues, as well as Dr. Henderson, Dr. Kirby, and Sugart. In 2019, Duntsch was the focus of the premiere episode of License to Kill, Oxygen's series on criminal medical professionals. Duntsch's criminal activity was also profiled in the 2021 episode, The Real Dr.Death. I'm going to go ahead and play a few clips that I have saved, and we will end there.
Of his medical license. He's on trial in Dallas and charged for 1 botched surgery, but prosecutors say he's connected to 2 deaths and 34 seriously injured patients. Fox 4's Natalie Solis just stepped out of the courtroom after a full day of testimony. Natalie.
Well, Steve, Christopher Duntsch has been indicted in several cases where patients were left seriously injured, paralyzed, and even dead. But this trial is just for one of those cases. And in somewhat of an unusual move, prosecutors are allowed to call other patients who will also testify that their lives are forever changed by the gross malpractice of Christopher Duntsch.
I was having lots of pain.
79-year-old great-grandmother Mary Eford telling the jury she'd gone to Dr. Christopher Duntsch for back surgery in 2012 to eliminate chronic pain, but left barely able to stand or walk.
I've never had pain like that before. It was just almost, it was a 10 plus.
Prosecutors say Duntsch not only severely bungled her spine surgery, but amputated part of her nerve root.
If you asked how egregious it was, I'm not even, it's as egregious as you can imagine.
Dr. Robert Henderson testified he was called in to try to correct Duntsch's surgery, calling Eford's case an atrocity and questioned Duntsch's qualifications.
I became concerned whether or not he was a physician and was a surgeon.
Fox 4 first covered Duntsch in 2013, patients showing up to his Plano office trying to get records after his medical license was suspended, then finally revoked. In 2015, he was arrested for shoplifting and aggravated assault. There were allegations of drug and alcohol abuse, including a DWI conviction out of Colorado. Duntsch's defense attorney, Robbie McClung, says this case even more unusual because the jury will be allowed to hear testimony from other patients from other indictments involving Duntsch.
It's just important that they not let emotion become more in control and they try to stick to the facts, since that's what guilt and innocence is supposed to be about.
All right, guys, that is all for this video. I will link a ton of videos relating to this case because there are a crap ton in the description box below. Do not forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow with another video.